trucks driving in and out, people packing their stuff, and helicopters flying overhead picking up delegates and supplies. That pretty much marks the end of the World Economic Forum here in Davos. Although it was the last day, there were some heavy-hitting topics on the agenda, from the US-China relations to global competition, how more than 4 billion people will be affected by the elections coming up in 2024, and the global economic outlook. In that panel, the guests, which included European Central Bank President Christine Lagarde and the Director General of the World Trade Organization, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, raised their concerns about the impact of geopolitical conflicts on major trade routes, such as the Red Sea and the Suez and Panama Canals, but also delved into approaches to tackling climate change and its challenges, which could be seen, as they say, as opportunities.
Trade has been a force for resilience. There's digital trade and services trade is growing fast, especially digitally delivered services trade, growing at 8% per annum. And that is a very, very interesting thing, because now we're all talking of digital platforms, AI, and this is a positive sign. Green trade has tripled from 2000 to now, tripled in value to $1.9 trillion. That's another opportunity. And finally, I want to say that the reshaping of supply chains, I see that as an opportunity and not a challenge.
At the same time, the head of the European Central Bank, Lagarde, called on Europe to be more self-sufficient and invest in its own market, especially in the face of hefty U.S. subsidies of green projects. She said that Europe must be strong at home and go on the offensive in the face of a potential return of Donald Trump to the White House.
I think the best defense, if that's the way we want to look at it, is attack. And to attack properly, you need to be strong at home. So being strong means having a strong, deep market, having a real single market.
And with that panel, this year's World Economic Forum has come to an end. Much was discussed throughout this whole week as the world transitions to a new set of geopolitical, technological, demographical, and environmental conditions, with policymakers and key stakeholders pledging to go by this year's theme of rebuilding trust, but also warn that there are a lot of risks that lay ahead. Evangelo Sipsas for CGTN. Davos.
For more on what they said or didn't say from the World Economic Forum, we'll talk about these major takeaways. Joining us, Ryan Patel, Global Business Executive, Senior Fellow, Drucker School of Management, Claremont Graduate University, from the beautiful, not snowing place of Los Angeles. Ryan, welcome back. Look, last year, they said something similar. The year before, they said something similar. I feel like Davos is that person that tells you all the bad things that could happen, and then you wait for the year and nothing really happens, some other stuff happens. But at the same time, they're not saying anything that are actual things that we can execute in terms of these problems in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's become a who's who, and that you do have to go. Like you and I talked about, I think remember last year going, well, are we going to see less of an attendance? We didn't see that this year. I think what's interesting for me when I watch Davos is what leaders are saying and aren't saying, right? It's not so much of how they're doing it, it's what they're thinking about. And you can then hold them accountable, hold the strategy together, what certain companies are looking through. Obviously, this year's theme was AI. But for me, I'm ignoring what they say on a top level, Phillip. I'm thinking about, well, are they really diving into it? Why are they talking about it now more so than ever? Is because boards are asking it. Do you have regulations in there? Now, I don't expect those answers. We didn't really get those answers, Phil, on regulations, how governments come together. I think it's more like you said, they're in talks. So as a takeaway, that's not a takeaway. But to me, it's interesting to see which companies are more comfortable than last year to this year are talking about it. And, like you said, what issues are they more comfortable with? I think to me, that's the takeaway.
Last year, we were worried about, in terms of the economy, at least inflation, right? Inflation was running rampant in Europe. Inflation was running rampant here in the US. That seemingly has been resolved. But rates still remain high, And people are talking about, well, when might they cut? When they cut in maybe March, maybe April, maybe June, whenever. It seems like there's not a super big concern that rates might stay high for a while. So if I read into it, they must believe that rates ultimately would be cut at the end of this year, and that would resolve that issue.
You read into that 110%. That's why these Davos, when they come together, you get to see, you know, the word recession actually in the conversations didn't even come up. Phil, last year, that conversation was among a lot of the executives. This year, that conversation seemed in a majority that it wasn't a concern. I think even with the interest rates, I think there's some kind of sense that it'll happen third quarter, fourth quarter. But even then, they're not even talking about, well, that's going to help. You know, it's that helps certain these companies to do more. I think it's not on the table right now. That is a main concern like it was last year. And so to me, that is not a concern until it becomes one, Phil. And thus far, they put it to the side because it's not on their table to seeing it right now.
I think about Europe quite often because it's obviously a major trading partner here in the U.S. and it has a major influence when it comes to the stock market. By the way, that keeps hitting all-time highs in the face of what's happening with Russia and Ukraine, in the face of what's happening in Israel, and we haven't even discussed what's happening on the Red Sea. All these things combined, are you surprised that there isn't more of a crisis mentality? You've got three fairly important events that are happening just right there on their doorsteps.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be lying to you if I didn't. I mean, these things are global impacts. I think the market is being led by the tech stocks. I mean, no doubt about it. And because of tech, right, it's dragging along the rest of the market, in my opinion. And so that kind of subsidizes what's, you know, in the short term, Phil, in the short term, not as panic. But when you think about the Red Sea, you think about global supply chain, it's going to have an effect the longer that this goes on consumer prices. And then we're going to be back to this conversation about savings and debt and how, you know, maybe we'll be back to the inflation conversation. We're not there yet, but I mean, it does have a domino effect, and on top of the wars that you mentioned. So I don't think it's as top of mind because of the run, but I don't think that we're out of the woods by no means, because these are situations that do have an impact, not just in the U.S.
So we don't do this too often.
Europe as well.
I'm going to drag you into a little politics here. I'm going to read you something that they wrote from Davos. They said both publicly and privately, U.S. executives said at Davos they were not concerned if Donald Trump wins the 2024 presidency. Not a huge surprise. I'm surprised that came out of Davos. But I wonder if the Europeans, folks like Christine Lagarde, if they feel the same way.
Well, I mean, if you've heard her statements in the past, I mean, I don't think it takes a genius to figure out where she leans on that conversation in general. I think the interesting aspect, should it be a second term for President Trump, is it going to be like the first one, or is there going to be more stability drawn? Is it going to be more trading involved? I think I actually not as shocked. I mean, I guess you're a little shocked that it came out of Davos, but I think when you think about the economy, he's running on that platform that this is what he, you know, is going to try to do to stabilize the economy, and maybe that's why the conversation came up. But I think for Europe as trading partners, if it takes into a turn into trade wars again, I don't think that wins. That's not. I have a feeling that won't be. I hope that's not the case. But if it's that mentality,
yep,
we're going to see some bumping roads, and I don't think that's
well,
definitely not needed.
For the
right
record,
now.
Christine Lagarde said they need to prepare for offense. I'm not quite sure what that means, but that's another conversation for another time. Ryan, good to see you. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil.